able to join us, and we're very grateful for her doing so by videotape, and we'll go to it now. Miranda Devine.
What we know, and I think is now has been quite well aired, and which is being investigated by the House Republicans, is that Joe Biden was involved in his son Hunter and his brother Jim's overseas business deals, particularly with China. And he met at least a dozen of Hunter's foreign business partners and benefactors and associates. And in fact, that very first story that we published in the New York Post on October 14, 2020, just 3 weeks before the election, that was an email showing that Joe Biden had met with Hunter Biden's Burisma benefactor in Washington, D.C. when he was vice president. And that was why they panicked so much, and why the 51 former intelligence officials had to rush out that dishonest letter and pretend that it was Russian disinformation, and why big tech, Facebook and Twitter had to censor our story, because this was the bombshell. This was the evidence that Joe Biden was involved in the family influence peddling scheme, actively involved, meeting, at that point we only knew for sure one of Hunter's business associates from overseas, and so they had to bury it. Since then, we've discovered much, much more, and that's from other material in the laptop, but also from whistleblowers that have come forward, also from Treasury Department documents, suspicious activity reports, and also from Hunter Biden's associates themselves, and speaking either anonymously in the background perhaps, or as testifying either to the grand jury or in some cases to the House Republicans, mostly to James Comer's House Oversight Committee, in his closed door, behind the scenes, transcribed interviews. So we're building together a picture that really we knew that Joe Biden, this influence peddling racket that was enriching his family, that he was not only the product that they were selling, but that he was intimately involved. He would meet the business partners either overseas or in Washington, D.C. He would take Hunter on Air Force Two when he was vice president to countries like China, where that was a big deal, and where it was crystal clear to the Chinese when Hunter Biden gets off the jet with the vice president that he was there to do private business, because as everybody knows, in China and elsewhere in the world, you don't give the bribes to the powerful person, you give them to the family member of the powerful person. So that much we know. And I think also we managed to find a little bit of evidence on the laptop that Joe Biden was personally benefiting, profiting from this business. So it's just a tiny bit, and it may be the tip of the iceberg, but I mean, it still looks pretty bad. This was where Joe Biden had commingled finances with Hunter. They shared at least one debit card. And also Hunter was paying for bills for Joe Biden, whether it be maintenance and upkeep on one of Joe's Delaware mansions, buying new shutters for the cottage on the estate, or painting, or fixing a retaining wall, those sorts of things that end up costing a lot of money, $10,000 here, $5,000 there. And also, interestingly, Hunter was paying for a cell phone for his father, and that was an AT&T bill. I think it was a couple of $100 a month. That, I think, will be another source of great interest to the House Republicans in their investigations. The millions of dollars that was being paid to the Bidens was coming from the CCP, because the CFC was not just an energy company, it was the capitalist arm of President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. And so it was using the Biden name to get into countries that perhaps might have been a little wary by that stage of China investment and knowing that it would end up in a debt trap. And so when you had the name of Vice President Joe Biden, the most powerful man in the region, then of course these countries were happy to comply, and they'd be, Romania or Kazakhstan, various countries in Europe. And so that's what the benefit for CEFC during Joe Biden's last 2 years of his vice presidency, that was what they got out of the deal. And so they didn't pay the Bidens, though, until a few weeks after Joe Biden was no longer vice president, because, they all knew, the Bidens knew that they had to have plausible deniability. And of course, that's worked like a treat for them, because the media doesn't bother asking the extra question, in a way that the story of the cover-up by the FBI and the CIA and the DOJ is shaping up to be a bigger story than the original story of corruption. Because if you step back a little bit, you have to think to yourself, why did the deep state, these agencies, risk a lot to intervene in not just the 2016 election, but the 2020 election, in order to make sure that Donald Trump was out of the way and that Joe Biden was elected? And when you think about it, Donald Trump was an existential threat to the military-industrial complex and to those very powerful people that made a lot of money and are still making a lot of money out of China. Donald Trump wanted to normalize relations with Russia, and he wanted to punish China for stealing our intellectual property. He wanted to basically confront their aggression. And that was not something that was convenient to the most powerful people in this country, and I guess around the world. But also it wasn't convenient to the deep state, to the CIA and FBI people. And so they conspired to ensure that Joe Biden who's their willing puppet, became president. And so I think that's a bigger story. And now that he is president, you can see just in his policies how he's gone soft on China, whether it be the fact that he's dismantled the China Initiative, which was supposed to combat the infiltration of China into our universities and the theft of intellectual property. His failure to do anything about TikTok, which is a real clear and present danger, and particularly because it targets youth and it does so deliberately to destroy the concept of America and American values and ideals and replace them with something sick. You could even say that the transgender epidemic owes a lot of its genesis to TikTok. And so the whole woke virus, which the Chinese are quite happy to stoke. And so TikTok is one example, sanctions, oil, the fact that China has become strengthened by the Ukraine war and is now Russia's paymaster. And while we're spending trillions of dollars trying to prop up Ukraine against Russia, and we're just making China even stronger. So all of those things, China has benefited enormously from Joe Biden's presidency. And so while we can't say conclusively that this is because Joe Biden is compromised, it's a pretty straight line between the money that his family took in and an expectation that, of course, that makes him compromised. He doesn't want this story to come out. He doesn't want people to know. And so they're doing whatever they can to use every lever of the state to crush anybody who might have evidence against the Bidens.
Miranda Devine, such an important introduction to the topic at hand. Of course, it's not just the case that the Chinese Communist Party is able to rely on its old friend, Joe Biden, to try to suppress information about his involvement with them. It's able to count on him to do its bidding in other respects as well. And we've reached back into the archives of these programs to get a very important quote from one of our colleagues who could not be with us at all today, but who has contributed to many of these programs. But it was one that I think is really essential to properly calibrate just how grievous is the nature of the relationship between Joe Biden and his family, and for that matter, subordinates in his executive branch and allies in the Congress, to the national security of the United States. We're going to, as I say, take a clip from a conversation I had, I believe, on our Securing America television program with Charles Sam Faddis, a man who has served in a number of capacities in our country's public service, as an Army officer, as a Assistant Attorney General in Washington State, but most relevant to the present task, as an undercover career spy for the Central Intelligence Agency. In that capacity, of course, he spent, I think, the better part of 2 decades recruiting, running, and controlling assets, agents, spies for our country. In short, he knows whereof he speaks. And he spoke in this particular clip using the lexicon of his trade about the nature of the relationship between Joe Biden and the Chinese Communist Party. Let's go to that video.
You know, there's ample evidence, obviously, of Joe Biden's complete compromise, and on record as having said I consider him to be a controlled asset of the CCP. But I mean, that goes for his entire national security team is compromised as well.
Well, that was actually from one of our previous webinars rather than the clip from the show, but it captures the point. According to Sam Faddis, a highly skilled and accomplished manager of controlled assets, that's what we're dealing with in Joe Biden. And he went on to say, in I think both that program and others, that if you're running spies or running assets and they're not controlled, they're not an asset, they're a liability, and you steer clear of them, you don't continue to work with them, let alone reward them. Further evidence that Joe Biden is indeed, and has now been for some time, a controlled asset of the mortal enemy of the United States, the Chinese Communist Party. A man who has studied these matters closely, both with respect to Joe Biden and his family and his somewhat larger circle of confidants and employees, but also a host of individuals in senior positions throughout his government, as well as some of their allies, as I mentioned, on the Hill, is our next speaker. No stranger to this program of webinars, and certainly to those of you who are paying any attention, I guess, because of his enormous and highly impressive content in both book form, in films, in essays, in podcasts, and of course, countless interviews. His name is Trevor Loudon. Among those products are several themed around enemies within, including enemies within the church. He's also written 2 really important new multi-volume sets of books. One about the United States Senate, entitled Security Risk Senators. The other, a 6-volume set concerning the House of Representatives, entitled House Un-Americans. We're always privileged to have him with us, but in particular to bring to bear in this particular context, in this particular venue, the fruits of decades now of work developing dossiers, bios, insights into the sorts of people who are enemies within the United States. Trevor, it's great to have you with us. Over to you, sir.
Thanks very much, Frank, and thanks for having me on. There's a couple of things to consider here. There's intelligence officers use a thing called patterns analysis. They look at the long-term pattern of a subject. Does he vote certain ways in the interests of certain people? Has he a long pattern of association with certain people? Does he do things that benefit certain people? These are flags. The Chinese Communist Party also has a very interesting saying. It's little bad mouth, big help, meaning it is acceptable for a Western politician to criticize the CCP or its actions as long as it isn't too excessive and as long as lots of real help follows. So it's sort of a cover, so to speak. Yes, I can work for the CCP. Yes, I will criticize China where it suits to establish my bona fides, but really it's little bad mouth, big help. Well, Joe Biden is a pattern of this kind of thing. Back in the 1970s, Joe Biden was Ronald Reagan's greatest enemy in the US Senate. It was Joe, Ted Kennedy, and John Kerry, who I call Jane Fonda with less testosterone. And it was those three that were confounding Reagan when he was trying to deal with the Soviet Union, who were stopping Reagan when he was trying to, deal with the communists in Latin America, the Nicaraguan Sandinistas, etc. Biden was consistently voting against Reagan's defense initiatives like SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, what the Soviets dubbed Star Wars, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, all sorts of things. He was very much in the opposing camp. Now, there was a very interesting memo that was discovered by Vladimir Bukovsky, the Soviet dissident, who had access to the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union's archives after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it was a memo about a recent visit by Joe Biden, where Joe Biden had made some comments criticizing the Soviets' treatment of dissidents. But the memo made it very clear that Joe Biden told his Soviet hosts, don't worry about that. I have to do this for American consumption. I don't care what you do to your dissidents. I am your friend. So little bad mouth, big help. He was willing to criticize the Soviets to some superficial degree, but really it was all about big help. Now, Joe Biden himself, it's not just China he's been compromised by. The whole evil empire really is what Biden's been about. He was first recruited to politics by an organization called the Council for a Livable World. And the man who recruited him was a senator called, a corrupt senator from Tennessee, called Al Gore Sr., the father of Al Gore Jr., who almost became US president in 2000 and is very much on the left. Well, Al Gore Sr. was the protege of a man called Armand Hammer, the leading American Soviet agent of the 20th century. The FBI was always trying to go after Armand Hammer, but Al Gore Sr. protected him from his position in the US Senate. Now, the Council for a Livable World itself was set up by a man called Leo Szilard, a Hungarian communist who became a Manhattan Project scientist and worked on the development of the United States nuclear weapon at the end of World War II. After World War II, he became a major peace activist. He set up the famous Pugwash conferences where Soviet and American academics and politicians and scientists would pontificate about nuclear disarmament. But it was all about American nuclear disarmament. It was revealed sometime later by Pavel Sukhoplatov, a top KGB officer who worked directly for Stalin, that Stalin had advised, sent the message down, and Beria, the spy chief, had sent the message down to Leo Szilard to stop his spying, but use his political influence to work for US nuclear disarmament. It also stated in Sudopladov's book that Szilard was a fully recruited Soviet agent. So this makes Biden's anti-military, anti-nuclear, anti-US, US armament stances very, very logical. He was put in place by two KGB agents, essentially, and his job was to gut the United States military. From his work with Obama on the START Treaty a few years ago that President Trump had to unilaterally cancel because it was so advantageous to Putin and so disastrous for America. Recently, Biden put 5 staff members from the Council for a Livable World into positions in the US State Department, the National Security Council, and the Department of Defense, all involved with issues of disarmament. Biden still wants to cut America's nuclear arsenal and cut America's Navy while we stand on the brink of confrontation with China and Russia. But this is, anybody who uses patterns analysis will tell you this is the work of a controlled asset. Now, Biden was also very much involved with Iran for many years. He was getting a lot of money from the Iranian American Political Action Committee, which is an arm of the mullahs. He's involved with NIAC, the National Iranian American Committee, which basically was the group that gave us the Iran nuclear deal. And Biden has been very, very vocal about wanting to restore the Iran nuclear deal, which would take away a large number of American sanctions on Iran so they could develop their nuclear arsenal more quickly. So Biden has been working in the interests of Russia, Iran, and now China for decades. I have documentation going back to 2001 where Biden offered to the Chinese Communist Party to help them with trade negotiations with the United States. He offered to help Communist China, not to help America negotiate with Russia. He offered to help China negotiate with America. So, and I think what we're seeing under Biden's administration can be viewed in these terms, because if you look at the debacle in Afghanistan, people are saying, what an absolute screw up. How could anybody be so stupid as to mishandle the withdrawal from Afghanistan, taking the troops away before the weaponry had been secured and evacuated, taking the troops away before American nationals and American-sponsored workers were looked after. I think it's only a stupid person would say that was stupidity, because, China wants to threaten both India and the Pacific, but they had a very big problem. They had this American base on China's western flank in Afghanistan, a very, very, very strong American base. So that helped to protect India, and that helped to gave China pause on attacking into the Pacific. Well, now they don't have to worry about that. Plus, China now has control of most of the rare earth minerals in Afghanistan, plus $800 billion of American military technology, plus I believe, the capacity, the machinery to create real American military IDs. Now, how many of the hundreds of military-aged Chinese nationals that have been recently monitored coming across the southern border may have some of those fake military IDs in their backpacks? We wouldn't know. But, and we look at energy policy, for instance. Biden appointed Deb Haaland as Secretary of the Interior. Deb Haaland was basically sponsored by Judith LeBlanc of the Communist Party USA. Judith LeBlanc ran Deb Haaland's campaign. She had campaign buses. She organized celebrity endorsements like Alyssa Milano and Sarah Silverman and Cher and Hannah Jane Fonda and Gloria Steinem. A member of the Communist Party, a leading member of the Communist Party USA, a central committee member of the CPUSA, which is 100% loyal to China, helped to engineer Deb Haaland to become Secretary of the Interior, and she is now busy shutting down every single energy lease she can on 20% of America, while Biden is going looking to buy gas, gasoline, and oil from America's enemies, Venezuela and Iran. Many of Biden's cabinet appointees, Marty Walsh, Secretary of Labor, deeply in bed with the pro-Chinese communities in Boston, the Chinese Progressive Association, etc. His possible replacement, Julie Su, deeply involved in the communist Chinese communities of California. She is a Maoist, an actual Maoist. So, looking at Patton's analysis, Biden is a controlled asset of not just China, but possibly Iran and Moscow as well. He is also is very much involved in the strategy of little badmouth, big help. He will criticize China. He will criticize Russia. He will do all sorts of things. But as Ilyanarov, who was Yeltsin's finance minister, recently wrote an article published on the Center for Security Policy website, that Biden's sanctions have been so structured they've actually helped Putin, not hurt Putin. So little bad mouth, big help, again. These are the patterns with Joe Biden. This is why I believe absolutely he is a controlled asset of not just the CCP, but more likely a couple of other enemy nations as well. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Trevor Loudon. We're not going to leave it at that altogether because we're going to ask you a couple of questions. We had hoped to have Congressman Chris Stewart with us, but I think the press of business has kept him from either participating at the moment, I know that for sure, but also to provide us a pre-recorded video, which I think he had hoped to do. We will catch him on another occasion, but Trevor, the great thing about you is that you are such a resource on these matters. And I would commend to our listeners, the course of this week, we will be rolling out at our television program, Securing America, an hour-long conversation with Trevor. So there's a lot more where this came from. And I wanted to pick up on something, Trevor, that you have often made a point of, that I'm sure, having not done so in this particular instance, is causing people to be curious. We have a security system. It requires background investigations. It requires, a vetting process, often some kind of, interviews with, if not the individual in question, certainly family members or neighbors or other associates, in the course of which we are led to believe trained counterintelligence professionals are evaluating whether someone can be entrusted with sensitive information and relied upon to handle that kind of information appropriately, given that it can, depending on the nature of it, of course, have shall we say, adverse consequences for the country if it is improperly handled, including, in some cases, loss of life, of assets, so-called sources and methods of intelligence collection. How is it that a guy like Joe Biden has been in public office for 50-some years, and despite all of this conduct, these relationships, this advocacy, to say nothing of the actual corruption that is now evident, has continued to have access to classified information, to say nothing of being able to exercise power based upon it in two of the highest offices in the land?
But that's a very interesting question. There was an incident back in the 80s where Joe Biden's very close friend, Ted Kennedy, was discovered to be doing backroom deals with the Soviet Union, basically telling them he would confound Reagan's foreign policy positions in exchange for Soviet help when he was considering running in the 1984 election. Now, this was revealed. Memos were discovered revealing this. And a friend of mine talked, Paul Kengor, talked to a CIA officer about this, saying this document was discovered in Russian archives by Kengor. And the CIA guy said, yes, of course we knew about this. And Kengor said, well, why didn't you do anything? Well, we couldn't touch him. He's a Kennedy. Yeah, there are certain levels. If you're a Clinton, if you're a Biden, if you're an Obama, if you're a Pelosi, you are untouchable. If you are a Feinstein, you are untouchable. I think this is the most shocking thing in American politics. We had Dianne Feinstein, who has worked with the communists since 1955. That didn't stop her chairing the Senate Intelligence Committee. And when it was revealed that she had a Chinese spy on her staff for 20 years, she said, oh, he was just my driver. Well, he wasn't her driver. He was her office manager who was getting Defense Department documents across his desk. Yet nothing happened to Dianne Feinstein. She should have been impeached immediately. She's on the Senate Intelligence Committee. She publicly lied to the whole nation about the spy working on her staff, but nothing happened. There were no implications at all. And this is the position you are. If you're Joe Biden, if you're an Obama, if you're a Feinstein, you are beyond touching. You can do dirty deals with Syria, like you can go to Syria and propagandize for the Assad family as Nancy Pelosi did. You can have deep communist connections, ongoing communist connections, lifetime communist connections, like Barack Obama did, and still does, but you're not allowed to say anything. You know, we know Biden was a shill for the Russians in the 70s. We know he was a shill for the Iranians in the 80s. We know he's been a shill for the Chinese at least since the early 2000s. It is well known by the intelligence communities. But as Sam Fatter said before, when this was brought up, no, we can't let people know that Joe Biden is a controlled Chinese asset, because this is hugely embarrassing for the intelligence community, and much of the intelligence community is compromised by our enemies, and much of our bureaucracy is also compromised by our enemies. We can't let the people know that Joe Biden is a Chinese agent, because if Joe Biden can be one, why can't the head of the CIA be one? Why can't the head of a major corporation be a Chinese asset, or a major defense contractor? Once it was revealed publicly that Joe Biden has been a long time Chinese asset, that would open a can of worms that would reverberate for centuries. That would put hundreds of other people in the spotlight. Everybody who'd worked with him, everybody he appointed, everybody he promoted, everybody who did deals with him. No. In the interests of national security and internal and domestic tranquility, it's better that we just let this situation go on. Well, Joe Biden's not going to be there forever. We'll have another president. Well, maybe, because Joe Biden has pushed this country to the brink of survivability. So this, I think it's high-level cowardice. It is this protection of elites. The elites protect each other, and it's treason. There are people in our system who are protecting Joe Biden because Joe Biden protects them, and they cannot risk him going down because they may well be next. We need to understand there's no background checks in Congress. There's no background checks in the Senate. There's virtually no background checks in the White House now. Clinton, Biden, Obama have abolished pretty much everything along those lines. So our enemies have carte blanche. Nobody's applying the Foreign Agents Registration Act. So enemies of America pretty much have carte blanche. And the Commander-in-Chief is almost certainly the top agent, and they cannot let him be exposed.
Trevor, I want to come back to the point you made just right there at the end, because I don't think it's generally understood, nor I think to the extent people are even aware of it, they can really comprehend it. How is it that people like Dianne Feinstein, people like Eric Swalwell, who actually slept with a Chinese communist agent and remained, thanks to Nancy Pelosi, on the House Intelligence Committee as a chairman of one of its most important subcommittees? How is it that Joe Biden, how is it that, Adam Schiff and Judy Chu and all of the others that you've profiled, the 40 U.S. senators, the 100 members of the House, can not be subjected to a security screening process that, the lowest ranking military personnel and others, you've said school bus drivers, I think, in one of your better turns of phrase, are required to submit to?
Well, the argument is always that the people must vet the candidate. So it's the people's duty to elect a candidate. And I agree with that. I don't think you could have security background checks for everybody who stands for public office, because that system would soon be weaponized by certain factions against their enemies. But what you can say, okay, you can be elected to Congress, you can be elected to the Senate, but once you're there and you want to serve on a committee, you absolutely have to submit to a background check. We don't elect you to the House Intelligence Committee. We don't elect you to the Foreign Affairs Committee. We elect you to the Senate or the Congress. But beyond that, that then becomes a time where vetting is very, very appropriate. If that was applied, I'd say the Democrats would soon have to clean themselves up, and the Republicans, because they'd start to find that a large number of their candidates would not be allowed to serve on committees. And that would be some questions that have to answer. How did you give us a candidate who is now can't serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, who can't serve on anything beyond dog catcher? So that and alone, to bring in background checks, security clearances for anybody serving on a committee. You don't have to serve on a committee in Congress. You can serve in Congress for 40 years and never serve on a committee if you want. And also the White House and other positions that are appointed, all of those should have extensive background checks. But then who would do the background checks? Right now, it is the FBI, the CIA, etc. Well, can we trust either of those organizations to do the appropriate background checks? So I think, should we get a new patriotic president sooner rather than later, I hope, I think a new agency would have to be set up, a super clean, very heavily vetted agency whose job is to replace the FBI in vetting government appointees, vetting the congressmen or senators who want to apply for committees. And that would have to be set up like the Untouchables, You'd have to interview 10,000 people to get 1,000 or a couple of hundred. And these would have to be super vetted people who hadn't, either maybe a few old hands who'd been out of service for 20 years, so hadn't been contaminated by the more recent corruption, a few people from special forces, etc., to specifically vet people for government appointees and veto those who exercise a veto on particularly egregious ones. And we could also, there are other ways we can do this, but yeah, this is a problem. It's not just background checks. We have to have someone who can be trusted to administer them, because right now we wouldn't. You know, look, I'm sure some of the people in the Obama administration had some sort of vetting, but I could have given all sorts of derogatory information on all of them. I put out derogatory information on Judith LeBlanc and Deb Haaland, who's Secretary of the Interior now. And I've got pictures, it's not hard to find, photographs of Deb Haaland having dinner with the top Communist Party member in America. Deb Haaland holding the signs for the Party of Socialism and Liberation, which supports Cuba and North Korea and Iran. The evidence is all out there. It's plain to see. But our congressmen and senators are too scared to venture into that national security swamp, and we can't trust the existing agencies to do efficient vetting. So we're in trouble right now.
Yeah, we certainly are. Trevor, let me just put one last question to you. We're going to wrap up a little bit early as we're only able to subject you to the questioning, but as always, you're incredibly generous with your time as well as your deep knowledge. I just keep coming back to my own experience, you know, in the Senate and then in the Pentagon, and the rigor with which one took the responsibility, if given access to classified information, to handle it properly. And let's face it, in part that was because the penalties of doing otherwise were very, very formidable. It would seem, and I think you sort of alluded to it in your previous comment, but it would seem as though everybody downstream of the President of the United States in the security food chain, if I can use that expression, is now in a position where they can be contemptuous, really, of these various processes. There are reports of Joe Biden's, you know, secret files stashed with his, you know, sports car in his garage. There are the reports that the conduct of him and his family with not just the Chinese, but with many other countries and their corrupt elites involved pay-to-play operations, suggesting that he was using access to him for money to influence U.S. policy. And then not least, there's the problem that we have the Biden family, in the person most obviously of Hunter, knowingly, as evidenced in his laptop, knowingly working directly with agents of the Chinese intelligence services when they were doing this influence peddling. How could it possibly be at this point that anybody throughout our national security establishment would take seriously the responsibilities, the oaths, the duties to handle classified information properly, not to compromise it, not to sell it, not to, leave it about in your house or wherever, or the consequences of failing to behave as they're supposed to. And I just want to say, you have done an enormous service to our country, you and Sam Pattis as well, with a project we call accountabilityinitiative.org, in which dossiers of the kind that you've discussed here, particularly of senior Biden subordinates, are laid out, and it's excruciating reading, honestly, because as I think Sam has said, and you too perhaps, if Xi Jinping wanted a dream team in American leadership against which to operate, this would be pretty much it. But anyway, talking about the implications, if this president of the United States is a controlled asset, What does that say to everybody else in the system? But also, frankly, what does it mean in terms of the damage that he could be doing to our country?
Well, you think about, what the old saying, was it John Donne or somebody? Why doth treason never prosper? Because when treason prospers, none dare call it treason. When it's so endemic, nobody dares to call it out. When we saw Hillary Clinton, you leave her servers and completely unguarded, and completely unguarded. That was negligence. The standard of law is not intent. The standard is negligence. She should have been in jail for that. Any low-level army clerk or somebody would have been in jail for that. Well, that sends a signal when she got off scot-free. When three Pakistani brothers were running the servers of 40 Democrat members of Congress for 10 years, and it was discovered, nobody suffered for that. Not one person. Nobody. The three brothers were allowed, I think one of them got a minor conviction, and they were allowed to go back to Pakistan, widely believed they were Pakistani intelligence agents. When Feinstein did what she did, no consequences. When Swalwell did what he did, no consequences with him. He was protected by Nancy Pelosi, who's just as bad as he is. So, this is the stuff of the last days of the Republic. If this doesn't turn around, because you've got a world getting ready for war against the United States, and they have their agent in the White House who's doing everything he can to weaken the military, who's doing everything he can to shut up our energy resources, who's doing anything he can to destroy our border security. If Joe Biden was a fully paid up Chinese agent and his job was to destroy our borders, destroy our military, destroy our middle class, destroy our energy resources, destroy our manufacturing capability with his Green New Deal, what would he be doing differently than he is today? We see the world as a very different planet from 3 years ago. When Trump was in power, Putin was in his box, Xi was in his box, Rocket Boy had settled down, and Iran understood the consequences of attacking America. And we had peace reigning in the world, the most peaceful 4 years for many decades. Well, it didn't take long for a new president to come into office to see all that fall apart. The invasion of Ukraine, the Iran on the verge of nuclear weapons threatening the Middle East, Rocket Boy threatening Japan and South Korea with nuclear attack, and China threatening India and the Pacific. So those are the consequences of not having any national security standards in place. Our enemies are now running rampant, and it threatens the actual survival of the nation. This is putting hundreds of millions of American lives at stake. This is putting the future of Western civilization at stake. Am I being a little too strong here, Frank? Am I being a little bit hyperbolic? I don't think so. I think this is what we're facing, and elections make a difference, but even more so, lack of national security awareness, lack of disciplined national security, lack of leadership from the top, and basically gutlessness from both sides of the house in dealing with these issues has led this country to an existential crisis. Am I getting a little carried away here, Frank?
I think you're speaking the truth in characteristically direct ways. Trevor, it's one of the things we prize about you as a member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, as one of the great contributors to this program and so much of what else we do. I want to thank you for that directness, for that candor, for that clarity. Because if this program in particular, but all of the others in this series, says nothing else to us, it is that we do not have enough of it at the moment. Our book, The Indictment, tries to synthesize so much of this and make it as accessible as possible. I commend it to you. It's available, as they say, where books are sold. And I hope you will find it useful and a vehicle by which to share not only its contents, but also those of these webinars. If you are subscribed to us, you are following the bouncing ball as to when we're having these calls and which days and all the rest of it. And I appreciate you bearing with us. And if you're not, hopefully you're catching them after they've been posted by our colleague and indispensable partner, Oleg Bashian. I want to thank Trevor Loudon, Miranda Devine, and of course Sam Faddis, and all those who have been helping us make the case that the enemy within and the damage that is being done by them, whether it's Joe Biden or others in his senior administration ranks, whether it is their counterparts in the Congress, whether it is those in finance, the Wall Street guys, business elsewhere, the academics, the media, journalists, and of course the Hollywood folks. They are empowering our enemy in time of war. They are aiding and abetting them. Trevor's used the word treason. I do not think that is hyperbolic or inappropriate. And we recommend in this book 20 different action steps that we hope will help our country contend with both the enemy within and the Chinese Communist Party, the greatest existential threat to freedom in the history of the world, effectively and decisively. It will take your help, and not least it will take God's help. And I pray that we will be blessed by all of that. I'm going to turn it back over to Didi Logason with my thanks to her and to all of you, and of course to our participants. So next time, this is Frank Gaffney. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks to all of our audience for being here today. We really appreciate your support. A video of this webinar will post to presentdangerchina.org within a date of the conclusion of our program. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. Then join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how the USA is betrayed by CCP captured elites. Thanks for joining us today, and goodbye.
Top-level secrets about Russian advanced bombers has just turned up at the U.S. southern border, seeking asylum. The man claims to have been an engineer at a production facility over in the city of Kazan. And he says that he possesses top-secret information about the White Swan Tu-160, which is the most advanced bomber in the Russian arsenal. U.S. border officials, they interviewed the man, and they determined that his story was in fact credible, and eventually passed him off to the FBI, who are still in the process of interrogating him right now. However, analysts have pointed out that the fact that the story was even leaked to the public is an indication that perhaps the American government is encouraging other Russians who also hold top-level secrets to also escape to America. And if you thought that was interesting, well then you should click on that button below this video and check out Epic TV, one of the best no-censorship video platforms on the internet.
All right, guys, there you go. Thanks for hanging out. I wanted everybody to see that because everybody keeps worrying about it. Damn it.
And to identify
Shut up. All right. Thanks for watching, you guys. Share it out. Quit worrying about all the squirrels and the shiny keychains and concentrate on what the real problem is. Share it out. Send it to your local reps. God bless everybody. Thanks for hanging out. See you later.